Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Donald Trump threatens the EU with 200% tariffs on its alcohol, including wine and champagne. Why space tech could be worth £1 billion to the UK economy. Plus, one of the UK's most iconic motoring manufacturers, Morgan, warns of challenging times ahead for the industry as it unveils its new super sports car. A very good afternoon on this Thursday Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Just going to keep you up to date with the news lines that are emerging in reaction to that press conference we've just seen with President Putin, in which he said there are questions about a ceasefire with Russia on the offensive, but suggesting that he could well accept that potential ceasefire plan, though those questions remain. Well, we're hearing from Kyiv in the last couple of minutes, a Ukrainian government official saying it understands that it cannot recover all of its territory by military force right now and will need to do so diplomatically over time. Also suggesting that territorial concessions were not discussed in Jeddah, but also saying that Kyiv, Ukraine, will not recognise Russian rights over Ukrainian territory. And that seemed to be one of the things that Vladimir Putin was suggesting, that there had to be international recognition of those territories that Russia currently occupies as Russian territory. Ukraine saying that they will not do that, but conceding somewhat that they will recover that territory by military force, not right now, but rather diplomatically over time. And we'll be bringing more, of course, reaction that we get from Kyiv in reaction to that very lengthy press conference with the Belarusian president and the Russian president as we get it. Also keeping an eye on this crucial meeting that's taking place in the White House in Washington, due to start any time now. That, of course, between Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, and President Trump. They are due to meet in the Oval Office any moment now, and we will bring you coverage of that meeting as soon as we have it. Sticking with the US President, though, and Donald Trump, he has fired yet another shot across the bows of global trade today, threatening the European Union with a 200% tariff on its alcohol, including on wine and champagne. The US President said it was retaliation for the EU's plans to impose duties on American whiskey. This is what Donald Trump had to write on Truth Social today. He said that the European Union, one of the most hostile and abusive taxing and tariffing authorities in the world, which is formed solely for the purpose of taking advantage of the United States, has just put a nasty 50% tariff on whiskey. If this tariff is not removed immediately, the US will shortly place a 200% tariff on all wine, champagnes and alcoholic products coming out of France and other EU-represented countries. This will be great for the wine and champagne business in the United States. Let's bring in our economics and business correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan. Gurpreet, very good afternoon to you. I'm sure there are many people at home shouting at the TV saying champagne can only come from France. But on a serious note, this is a further sign of the escalating trade war between the United States and, frankly, it seems almost everyone else.
Yeah, it's definitely the latest escalation in what's becoming a tit-for-tat trade battle between the US and the EU. Donald Trump, a few hours ago, as he pointed out, said that he would put a 200% tariff on all alcoholic products coming into the US from the EU if the EU fails to remove a 50% tariff of its own that it's placed on US whiskey. That's an American industry with a big and growing market in Europe. And that was part of a package of tariffs that the European Union announced yesterday, worth about 26 billion euros, covering a range of products, many of them made in Republican states like Kentucky Bourbon, Levi jeans, Harley Davidson motorcycles. And that was in itself, I hope you're keeping up, a response to Trump's 25% tariff on aluminium and steel coming into the US. And the EU is the third largest importer of such metals into America. So that's obviously going to hurt. I think it's perhaps unsurprising that Donald Trump has chosen to respond like this. He took a very similar approach with the Canadians after Canada's Ontario province slapped a 25% tariff on all electricity going in to the United States. Donald Trump, in response, said that he would ratchet up the tariff on aluminium and steel coming from Canada to 50%. It worked. The Canadians capitulated, and I think he's hoping that with this threat of a 200% tariff on wine and other alcohol coming in from Europe, that he can also bring the EU to heel.
And Gurpreet, we're also all focused on this date of April 2nd. I mean, Donald Trump has mentioned it over and over and over again. What are we expecting on that date? And is there any way, particularly for us in the UK, that we can kind of navigate our way away from that? Because we know that Jonathan Reynolds, for example, the business secretary, is in negotiations with the United States in a desperate bid for the UK to avoid any further tariffs. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think one thing that's become increasingly clear from the way that Donald Trump has been behaving, his approach has been very erratic, is that he slaps on tariffs, he introduces month-long delays, he then implements them, he then changes his mind. And I think that's given the UK and other European nations and the EU hope that he might change his mind, that this is a strong negotiating stance from the president. I don't think he plans to implement a 200% tariff on European wine, for example, but he definitely wants to bring the Europeans to heel, and he definitely wants other countries to do as he says. And Britain, for its part, hasn't implemented any retaliatory tariffs against the Americans. It's looking at its position. It doesn't have a trade surplus with the United States. It knows it's not in Donald Trump's direct firing line, and any retaliatory tariffs from the UK would only sort of poke the bear at a time when it's hoping that it might still be able to achieve a free trade deal.
OK, Gurpreet, for the time being, thank you very much indeed, Gurpreet Narwan there for us. Just a couple of other lines coming into us in regards to continuing reaction to that press conference this afternoon. The Ukrainian government saying again that they're essentially wanting to see a ceasefire was a demonstration of their readiness to accept a 30-day ceasefire, was a compromise to show that Ukraine wants to have peace. So that is Ukraine saying that they are ready to accept the ceasefire because they do want to show they're willing to compromise. Meanwhile, we are starting to get some news emerging from that meeting between Mark Rutte and Donald Trump in the Oval Office. We haven't got pictures yet, but we have got some lines via some of the news agencies. Donald Trump saying that Witkoff is in serious discussions in Russia. We're expecting that meeting between his special envoy and Vladimir Putin to begin imminently in Moscow. And we're also hearing that Mark Rutte has said that we need to produce more weapons. We're not doing enough. We're lagging behind the Russians and Chinese. So that is the NATO Secretary General saying that NATO needs to produce more weapons. And clearly we'll have coverage when we get actual pictures from inside the Oval Office as we get them here on Sky News. Now, let's turn to the space race in many regards, because the Science Secretary this week hailed recent investment in the UK's space sector, saying that Britain can be a launchpad for innovation. Last quarter, British companies attracted more than £80 million from the European Space Agency, with the investment expected to add £1 billion to the economy and create nearly 4,000 skilled jobs. Let's speak to Mark Pocket, who's Chief Executive of the UK space-based tech firm, Sirahim Space. Very good afternoon to you, Mark. First of all, what's fascinating about this is it comes at a time in which we're focusing on some big stories in the world today. You know, the prospects of potentially a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine after a war that's frankly been going for more than a decade. And one of the key technological developments in the past decade or so was how much more the realm of space has played in modern warfare.
Yes, absolutely. Space has always traditionally been a sort of key element of modern warfare, from communications, from intelligence gathering, from navigation. And this has really been increased very significantly into focus as to how new space is being used within the Ukraine war, and how important new forms of communication such as Starlink from SpaceX has been within that war.
Yeah, indeed. And how reliant have particularly Ukraine been on that technology? I mean, we know that when the US temporarily cut off intelligence sharing, a large part of that intelligence sharing comes via space, doesn't it?
It does, and it's of huge concern, because the warfare is very much moved in favour of drone-related warfare, and you need connectivity, you need GPS positioning in order for that to be effective. So switching off that type of capability is a very negative thing for the Ukraine. This is part of the reason why, since the US has sort of taken this position, that governments around Europe, including the UK, have met and agreed through a summit that they're going to be applying 800 billion euros of additional funding to this market so that they can have sovereign capability for these important areas.
And Mark, talk us through that extra investment. As you say, it's coming from the European Space Agency, but this is also a bit of a boon for not just your company, but indeed the wider UK economy. Is that right?
Absolutely. There is a very significant requirement now for UK and for Europe to step up to recover from decades of underinvestment in defence. The new budgets that have been made available are really to very rapidly address gaps in capability that have been left as a consequence of US no longer being willing to support defence in Europe and in the UK. So these significant amounts of budgets that are going to be required to buy capability are really going to sort of fall on the companies that exist today, new companies in new space market that are providing the kind of capabilities that will be required to address these gaps.
And sorry, carry on, Mark.
One of the areas that is really of interest to the UK is using its position as a potential launch nation in order to be able to provide launch services to the rest of Europe. So this is one of the things that the government has really been focused on. They've been supporting UK launch companies and providing capital to enable them. They've been opening up the market to international companies like the Rocket Factory to be able to enable launch from the UK in a short period of time. This should really enable the UK, enable all of the space value chain within the UK market, but really play a really supportive role to supporting our European allies as well.
Yeah, indeed, and that's just my final question, Mark. I note that you're obviously in Los Angeles, but frankly, there's been a lot of talk about European cooperation, increased European cooperation in the last couple of weeks, given the seeming unreliability of the United States. Is that where the UK's space interests lie now in Europe, rather than in partnerships with, for example, the US or others?
Yes, very much so. The US has really sort of led on innovation in the space market, and great examples are companies like SpaceX. Now that the UK is now that Europe is seeking really to become more sovereignly capable in defence, there's now a situation where we need to sort of develop these capabilities ourselves. So the European countries are really looking to the UK as a technology leader in this area, and we believe that is really going to be a core enabler for investment in the years ahead.
Okay, Mark, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Mark Bockert there, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
This is the Oval Office, the White House in Washington, D.C., where Mark Rutte is currently meeting with the US President Donald Trump. And again, we're continuing to getting some news emerging from inside that room. We're not allowed to play the pictures as it comes in live, but clearly the news agencies in that room are able to report what's been said. Donald Trump saying that he would like to see a ceasefire from Russia. Also saying that Putin put out a very promising statement, but it wasn't complete. That he is willing to talk to Putin, and we know there's been suggestions that they are due to talk on the phone again imminently. Donald Trump also saying on the tariffs we're talking about a little bit earlier, he's not going to change his mind on the April 2nd tariffs. Interestingly, returning back, I suppose, to the Ukraine-Russia situation, he suggested there is a big power plant involved in Russia-Ukraine talks. Not entirely sure what that alludes to. It may be, and we know this with Donald Trump, he does like to have a bit of carrots involved in these negotiations. That might be a sign that he may be willing to normalise economic relations with Russia again if there is an attempted ceasefire. But the top line emerging from those talks so far is that he would like to see Russia move on this, like to see Russia agree to that ceasefire, but ultimately saying that while it was a promising statement this afternoon, it wasn't complete. We will have continuing coverage from Washington of this meeting between the NATO Secretary General and Donald Trump in just a couple of minutes here on Sky News. Do stay tuned.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank.
These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them. A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again.
This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under.
Sky News, the full story first.
It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering designed to humour and to help us.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls. and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
1,500 movies? I don't want this flight to end. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Very welcome back to Sky News. This is the scene in Washington, D.C. this afternoon. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, is currently meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office. President Trump saying that he is hopeful that Russia will do the right thing in response to that ceasefire proposal. We heard, of course, from President Putin this afternoon suggesting he was open to the ceasefire, but the questions, substantial questions, remained. He said, this is President Trump, that the Russian president put out a promising statement, but insists it was not complete and reiterated he is willing to talk to Putin about the ceasefire proposal. He, as I say, is meeting with the NATO Secretary-General, an organisation he's been quite damning towards, consisting, it must be said, over the last decade or so, arguing that many NATO countries are not paying enough into the NATO budget. Well, he has also said this afternoon with Mark Rutte in the room that NATO is stepping up, is the remark that he has made. Interestingly, he's also been talking about tariffs and trade, suggesting that he is not going to change his mind when it comes to those April 2nd tariffs. Though we've not got the detail of what those tariffs at the moment look like, and saying that there will be a little disruption, but it won't be for very long in terms of what impact it may well have on the US economy. So, as I say, we are keeping across those lines emerging from that meeting. We will also have pictures pretty soon, I would say, here on Sky News. We can't bring them to you live, but as soon as that meeting finishes, we will bring you them, and we'll keep you up to date, as I say, with those news lines from the journalists that are in the room throughout the afternoon here on Sky News. Let's bring you some other breaking news this afternoon, and it involves the Olympic Games. Let's bring in Rob Harris, our sports correspondent, who is here. And there's a new deal between Comcast and the International Olympic Committee.
Yes, Comcast, the parent company of Sky News, securing a new US rights deal, extending them for the United States, covering the 2034 Olympics and 2036 Olympics. It's worth $3 billion, and we're being told that this is a major contribution to the long-term financial stability of the entire Olympic movement. The US rights, a key source of revenue for the IOC, 90% of which of that revenue is redistributed to help athletes and sports around the world. To put that into some perspective, the last deal that was agreed between NBC and the IOC was worth $7 billion or so for 6 Olympics, and the last tranche of that deal was for the 2030 and 32 Olympics worth $2.6 billion. So an uplift from $2.6 billion to $3 billion for these Olympics. They crucially involve the 2034 Games in the United States, in Salt Lake City for the Winter Games, and the 2036 Games, where we don't know where it'll be yet, but that is quite a hot contest because we've got Saudi Arabia, Qatar, maybe India also in the race for that as well. But
yeah, and it's also, you know, for NBC, it's a big deal because, you know, a lot of people watch the Olympics in the United States.
Yes, it's a big source of ad revenue for NBC. We saw it with the Paris Games last year. It brings in huge audiences. Sport brings in those live audiences, which perhaps some television cannot bring anymore. But this is about moving beyond the linear world as well. It's about Peacock, the streaming platform, about digital partnerships as well with the Olympic movement. But certainly there are a lot of eyeballs on the Olympics. Those few weeks, whether it's in the summer for the Summer Games or around February time for the Winter Games, you get those big mass television moments, particularly for the ceremonies.
Rob, great stuff. Breaking news this afternoon, that deal between Comcast and IOC extending Olympic rights until 2036. Rob Harris, thank you very much indeed. As I say, this is the scene live in Washington. President Trump meeting with Mark Rutte, saying this afternoon that he is hopeful that Russia will do the right thing, saying also that he is expecting to speak to the Russian president, but also saying that while it was a promising statement from Vladimir Putin today, he insists it is not complete and that he wants, as I say, Russia to do the right thing. We will be keeping across that Oval Office meeting, and we will have pictures from inside the White House very soon here on Sky News. That is it for Business Live, though, for the moment. We're back, of course, at 11:30 tomorrow morning. To join me then if you can. Mark Austin is up next with the News Hour.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news.